Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Hi, it's Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. And we do have some returning friends to this episode, but first, let me say hello to Mark. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Good to have you on here. Will Moorcroft, unfortunately, could not be on this morning. And Ramsey, good to see you. And I wonder if you could say hello and set the stage for our returning guests by popular demand.
So, absolutely. So, glad to be here for yet another week. What is this? Are we episode 80 now? Or getting there? If we're not 80, we're very close.
We're very close. We're knocking at the door.
It's been and continues to be a fantastic run. Delighted to have what I think is our first return guest, which says a lot about our guests because they came to us with a very important message last time about the role of female advisors and female clients in financial services. And this week, we're going to be talking about another really critical issue, which is this idea of the sandwich generation. So with that, I'm going to ask Suzanne, Sheila, and Janet to each introduce themselves quickly and then get right into it because we want to find out more about the sandwich generation. And the first question is going to be, what motivated you to write this very important piece?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for inviting us back. I'll go first. Suzanne Norman, and I'm a principal with Milliman's Financial Risk Management Group out of Chicago. And the purpose of the paper was really born out of leadership work that I did last year for a certificate in leadership. And I really wanted to create more content and thought leadership within Milliman for women, because with the retirement focus that our practice has, retirement is a real concern for women. And one of the topics that Sheila and I have known each other many years talked about were the particular challenges around the sandwich generation. So I wanted to also make this cross practice. Milliman, as many listeners might know, is a private actuarial consulting firm with various specialties and practices. And I wanted to invite some other kind of people to this conversation that have different experiences. And so Janet joined us for this paper. So I'll pass it now to Sheila.
Certainly. Thank you, Suzanne. Sheila Jelinek. I've been in the financial services industry for about 25 years now. Been with Milliman since 2015. I am part of the business development group. I'm a director within that group. And writing this paper was really personal for me. And I'll share some of my personal stories. This year, I have moved my mom 3 times within different memory care facilities and also dealt with her being diagnosed positive with COVID. I live 10 hours away from my parents. So helping them navigate their healthcare journey and also being there for my father now, who for the first time ever in his 80 years has basically lost his partner and is living alone, and he's got his own healthcare woes that we're dealing with. So it has really been a journey from a distance standpoint of being so far away, and also the time commitment that falls upon me to help them navigate this journey. And the purpose of the paper was really to help others that are in the sandwich generation, that are dealing with helping care for elderly parents and helping raise children at home, to enlighten them and hopefully offer some hope and information within this paper. So that was really my story and purpose for the paper. And Janet, I'll pass that over to you.
Thank you, Sheila. My name's Janet Jennings, and I have decades of experience as a healthcare actuary and also of being in the sandwich generation. And I have a few stories of my own to share. But I was so eager to join in this podcast because I really want to promote the importance of saving for our own healthcare costs and retirement. As the actuary in the room, I do need to make the following statements that I would like to remind folks that our views in this podcast do not necessarily represent the views of our employer, Milliman, And the same caveats and limitations in our paper apply to this podcast.
All right, we got the legal stuff out of the way. So let's get
now we can talk.
now we can roll. All right, so let's get right into it. I'm going to say one thing up front, which has been very interesting that we've been hearing a lot from guests in various venues and various programs we've had is that we're all trying to meet clients where they are, but it seems like many of us are there ourselves, right? So the fact that you have these personal stories that dovetail with this very important issue that you, your clients' clients are dealing with is pretty fascinating. So let's get into it. Let's talk about, first of all, what is the sandwich generation? How should we think about who that is? Who are they? Who are we?
Sure, I'll take that one, Ramsey. The technical definition of the sandwich generation is essentially it's middle-aged adults that are sandwiched in between taking care of elderly parents and raising children at home. You're literally in that sandwich there. And no surprise, most of the people that are in the sandwich generation are women. A lot of the caregivers are women, and that was part of the focus in this paper. A couple of things about that sandwich generation. The sandwich is getting bigger. And what I mean by that is we've got 10,000 baby boomers that are turning 65 every single day. We have life expectancy, longevity is increasing. So you're having a larger need to have that elder care and have those adult children care for those parents and family members. And the other thing, and I know COVID is going to be woven throughout the conversation in this podcast, is the second shift. And what I mean by that, and it's quite interesting with COVID, with work from home, is you have your day job that pays you your salary, and then you begin your second shift. And the second shift could be, like I said, in my instance with helping take care of my parents while I'm 10 hours away, the hours, literally 3 or 4 hours a week, just doing paperwork and having conversations with physicians and navigating all of that is very time consuming, not to mention the laundry, the cooking, all of the things to keep that household running. The second shift is a real concern within that sandwich generation.
Yeah, I do think we can all relate to this. I mean, I unfortunately went through that as well. My father passed away with ALS. Lost my mother to dementia. And you're right. It's incredibly stressful. I happen to be an only child, so there wasn't a sister to, pick up the slack for me. So Sheila, I totally understand what you're going through, and I guess the question would be, is it harder or easier when you're at home and when you've got this, work, you've lost your commute, but you've got a whole nother layer of challenges thrown on top of it. So for you personally, has this made it easier or harder?
For me, because I was a road warrior pre-COVID, so I was on the road all the time. So for me, being able to be home and nest and be in one spot, that part has been much easier. What has been challenging is not being able to get on a plane and go 10 hours to be there with my parents and see my parents and have in-person conversations with physicians. And that has been the really challenging part. So it's really both, if you will.
Janet, Suzanne, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'll amplify a little bit just as far as what, if we're doing projections, which is, if you look at the Census Bureau, this challenge is only going to get greater. And one thing Sheila didn't mention, which is a real thing, which is the actual physical or monetary cost associated with the caregiving. And so when you look at the fact that, by 2030, we're looking at 70 million over 65, right? People, and Sheila mentioned, people are living longer. There's still going to be child caregiving needs. But right now, what we see is about a third of the dual caregivers, sandwich, are spending about $3,000 a week. My parents actually did that for my father's mother, where they paid an independent aide to take care of her in the home. And then you look at the credit card debt and the savings that are sort of being rated by about 75% of the caregivers. We mentioned this in our paper. So these are real type of financial consequences to having those competing needs. So I would add that.
And I would just say my personal story is that my grandmother was in the nursing home for 8 years and her savings were decimated. So my dad astutely got long-term care insurance for him and my mother. Now he passed without needing it, but my mom, if she didn't have that insurance, she would be paying northwards of $8,000 a month just for mid-level care.
Oh,
So,
the costs are just staggering. In some ways, my mother, both my parents were stubborn and kind of lived in their own homes till it was too late, to get them to move closer. Fortunate in that the part of the country they were in, it was a lot cheaper, so memory care, anywhere on the East Coast, I mean, easily $12,000, $13,000 a month, out in the West, okay, only 3,000 or 4,000. What a bargain. Now, I sort of dealt with this 4 or 5 years ago. Now, some of the technology actually was remarkably helpful, like, sounds ridiculous, but online banking, texts, being able to text people, sort of, it's amazing, FaceTime. If we fast forward, to today, Ramsey, Mark, and Mark and I've been talking to a lot of startups trying to provide a whole interesting raft of services. Do you think the technology and will enable business models that will let people stay in their homes longer? Will that change part of the equation? In terms of Janet, the expense that you might have to not incur.
Yeah, I really think that there already are a lot of good technological advances that can help us. We now have the capability to be able to watch what's going on in our parents' homes, so that we could, and we also have technology that, the buzzers they can click if they fall, so that they're not stranded. And, I personally can use Medicare.gov to enroll my mom in different Medicare health parts that we go into in the paper. So I think that really does help, especially with remote, with our parents being remote. And also, frankly, we're all being remote right now. No one is allowed to visit my mother in her care facility. So we're all going to have to do this while we're in COVID.
I think that's another major point to bring up. Number one, I guess, it sounds like really all of us have been impacted by this. My father went into a facility with this past year, and he's been in it really through the entire COVID period. He went in March of this year. And so the entire period he's been kind of, faced with the dynamic of COVID, and it's gone in and out in terms of the ability to visit and not. And now, we're at the point where we've got to make appointments to go visit, and we sit outside with a glass partition in between us, and we have 30 minutes to visit. And it's had a big impact, especially around holidays, like Thanksgiving. They were confined to their rooms. So it's definitely had an impact beyond, just the financial expense of it, and obviously that cost is pretty significant, but on the emotional well-being of the individuals as well. And just again, looking at this panel and really all of us impacted one way or the other, one of the stats that I was reading was that, a third of parents with kids between 8 and 14 are taking care of aging family members. I mean, that's a pretty broad market that really needs to be addressed from a planning perspective.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Ramsey. No, go ahead.
So I was just going to ask, so what we've very clearly framed the challenge, right? Yeah. What are some of the tools we have to address the challenge? Like what are some of the things that and particularly are there tools that have potentially shown themselves to be even more valuable now that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
I think, Ramsey, maybe one of the things we mentioned in the paper was that there's for people that have typically corporate type healthcare coverage, there's an employee assistance program that many employees do not know that they have access to. And I guess, surprised to say that I didn't know. Well, I shouldn't say I'm surprised, but I didn't know the robustness of the plan that Milliman offered. And I've actually shared it with a number of colleagues in different practices who weren't aware as well. And employee assistance has been around for many years, and the three of you may also, have experience with this. But one of the things that I thought was fascinating is that beyond just the typical sort of, you can get help with certain wellness issues that you're contending with, is that a lot of these policies cover anyone in your household. So it could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be, a partner. And so it could offer an array of services related to elder care needs, child care needs, college savings. I just encourage anyone who is through a corporate plan to inquire if you're not aware of it. Some of the ones that I thought were really interesting about Milliman's plan is you have on the spot ability to get counseling. And if you decide to, you can actually also get the same counselor up to 5 times. And I think as we're talking about the context of COVID and all the stress that's going on right now, and particularly for women, I would say, please take a look and see what coverage you have. There's another one, I'll mention one last one, which I thought was interesting since I practice this, but it's mindfulness. And you actually can get a mindfulness coach up to 5 times. So there are things that, make me think of that old saying, put your oxygen mask on first. And I know that our paper is slanted towards women, and the three of you have already shared, or at least 2 of you have shared as men, what your caregiving has looked like. But I would say there are resources out there if people haven't looked at them.
And I
talk to HR professional. Sorry, Sheila, go ahead.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I concur with Suzanne. I've learned so much. I've never utilized our EAP until this year. And even with some of the challenges with my parents, the resources available for elder care through our EAP, and every EAP is different, have been very impactful and helpful to me. Another thing that I would go back to the financial aspect of this, and I know we're going to talk more about the financial tools available. Really talking to a financial professional, no matter what stage you're in of the sandwich generation, the earlier the better from a planning standpoint. The conversations that I'm having now regarding my parents' finances should have happened about 10 years ago, but here we are. So my advice is work with a financial professional, understand what resources are out there to help pay for healthcare in retirement, because that is something that a lot of people don't really understand exactly what those costs are going to be. And working with someone who can help navigate those challenges will make a very stressful situation hopefully somewhat less stressful.
Yeah, and I can just speak from my experience, but also experience I've seen with other, clients, different companies I've worked for. Sheila, you can't emphasize that enough, especially if you've got a parent with dementia, and increasingly, we all are running into that problem. Well, what paper where? They think it's a balance, and it's really a debt, in accounts. Small things like which turn out to be really big things. Have you talked to all of your carriers and got permission to talk to them about your parents' accounts? I mean, that can be an utter nightmare, if you wait too long. Address changes. I've seen some horrible situations where money for policies were, like long-term care or long-term care like products were being taken by ACH out of bank accounts. Well, it's an annual deduct. Okay, what could possibly go wrong in a year? Oh, a lot. Mark, it sounds like, we haven't talked about this, but you're going through this. Where's the bank account? What's important? Well, can I shut the bank account down? I just moved my dad or my mom from this address that. Well, now institutions go out sending a notice and say, look, your policy's lapsed. What do you do? And unfortunately, by law, a lot of times the carriers can't go back and reissue these policies, just so I agree, Sheila, wholeheartedly. Talk to somebody early.
early on, have a family conversation. It's one of the hardest conversations to have, but it is the most meaningful conversations you'll ever have as a family.
Now, does the fact that everybody's on Zoom though actually help that? You know, we've talked to people where, and I've helped people where you have a conversation about planning and you realize you should have had another person in the room. Then you get the next person, you realize there are actually 4 people in the family who should have known, why are you doing this? For what purpose? And, you know, how do you get access to it if you need to? You know, does this give an opportunity when you've got everybody on Zoom at the same time to have a joint conversation about these issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, I live 10 hours away. I have one sister, she lives next door. Financial advisors in Georgia. So we're talking about 3 different states here. Absolutely. Zoom makes that aspect makes it a whole lot easier to get everyone on the same page. And even with my 80-year-old dad, at least my sister's there to help him navigate some of the technology challenges, but he's getting there, and it does help a lot to have everyone there.
So one of the things that struck me about your comments. So one was, pardon me, the value of an EAP. And so the EAP gave you access to counselors, right? But it actually presumes a certain level of competency among the counselors and a certain amount of relevance. Very similarly, Sheila, you mentioned the fact that there was a conversation you said you had recently that you might have had 10 years ago. So I would just ask, is that because you just got the financial advisor recently, or was it the financial advisor wasn't asking those questions? So like one of the very interesting sort of issues here is that in my experience, a lot of financial advice sort of revolves around asset allocation.
Yep.
But in fact, the biggest pain point and the most important elements of what people need to discover, and maybe it's not as exciting for financial advisors than talking about stocks and bonds, are these very issues, like really, you know, coming up with a forecast of what likely expenses are going to be, but also being able to give a heads up on a lot of these issues that are totally non-quantitative. These are much more sort of personal interaction issues. So I guess my question is like, so it sounds like Milliman did a great job finding counselors for you, right? So they made them available, good counselors. And then you had to get to a point where you were having the right conversation with your advisor. Like, how do we get there faster? How do we find the advisors that are going to solve those problems instead of just trying to solve like 60-40 versus 70-30?
Absolutely. I always say, we tend to do a really good job in accumulation, but when we move to distribution and covering those expenses, I think there's some work that needs to be done. So my personal story is unique in that while I've been in the financial services industry 25 years, my parents really did their own thing when it came to their finances for whatever reason. So I really didn't get brought into the mix. And you relate?
We've all experienced that.
Yes. I mean, full disclosure, yes, they did their own thing. And then I got brought into the mix probably about 4 years ago. And the financial professional, I should say, that I have worked with, we brought the accounts in and we sat down, we had a comprehensive plan. The financial advisor professional that I work with did a very good job of understanding the needs, putting the solutions in front of me, giving me referrals to elder care attorneys and resources there. And that was very impactful. And it could have been because the financial advisor was walking in the same shoes that I am walking in with his aunt. So I do think from a financial professional involvement, being able to facilitate those planning conversations with those families and be able to talk about, even at a high level, your Medicare options, what that looks like, really understanding what healthcare expenses are going to look like in the future. And in the past, I've had friends and colleagues say, this is never discussed. Well, to me, a comprehensive financial plan, you have to address those concerns there. And fortunately, I feel very confident with where we are now with my parents and the financial professional. I just wish it could have happened a little bit earlier on, because as you know, once you come to a certain point and when you're dealing with dementia, there's only so much you can do at that point. But I agree with what you're saying, Ramsey. I think the financial professional community does need to do more to address paying for healthcare and solutions available to help with that.
And we did put in our paper at the end, back to the audience, if you will, that we wrote for is certainly includes the actual investor consumer, women directly, not just the financial professional community. And I think the challenge is, you don't know what you don't know. And we did put together a series of questions, and Sheila's addressed a couple of them, but one that, I do think that ties into some of these comments was, as a financial professional, how are you trained to have these multi-generational conversations, right? Because your point, Ramsey, I think we've got a generation of advisors that grew up, and Sheila said it is, as accumulators, and I am your investment professional. But right now, with the challenges and the spend that most women especially are contending with, whether it be themselves or their parents, is, what is the plan? And when we look at it statistically, the number of comprehensive financial plans that are done in the industry right now, and you can ask almost any provider, and maybe the three of you would chime in as well with what you know, but it's below 10%. So maybe 1 out of 10 people are doing, and we're talking obviously about people that have estates that they're trying to manage, right? Meaning either they have enough for them or they're thinking legacy, but that's pretty dismal. And it's a problem. And I think that some of these questions that we put at the end of the paper, which I think Sheila and Jan and I will be happy to kind of go through that list, but helping people understand that you do need to advocate, and women especially need to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, you picked it. I'm telling you, great time to put a paper out and know you'll have a sequel, right? Like, let's just start with the expenses. Just how will, as we come out of this, COVID environment, how will it change the cost? Because I'm sure if I were managing a facility today, the costs have to have gone up tremendously, not only for the basics of the equipment, but the training, how many beds you can have. Do you think that's permanently going to change the cost equation on having people in assisted living centers?
Janet?
Yeah, I think that you have a good point there, Paul. I know before, when my cousins could visit my mother, they had to wear all this special equipment, head to toe being covered, and there's a lot more precautions involved. And so I think that will be an additional expense. Not able to quantify that yet, but I can see that overhead of managing all that and actually implementing it will create an additional expense. So, so you raise a good point there.
Well, another curveball, and this is something I heard just a few days ago, is that, the Biden administration has actually said caregivers will be of priority. Now, what could that mean? From if you were on the incoming administration's, task force to assist with caregivers, I mean, what type of policy changes could be made that would have a meaningful impact?
Yeah, I would only be able to conjecture on that. I don't know for sure what he's thinking about and how he plans to fund that. It can be, I think they did some estimates, and it's in the billions of dollars of how much it really costs to pay for people that do have special needs in their elderly years that don't get reimbursed because they're doing it for their families. So I'm not sure where that will go, but it is at least gratifying to see that that's on the forefront.
So a couple of things. One, I just want to say that the financial professional questions is a really good takeaway from this piece. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I think this is a really good takeaway. And I think, Paul, Mark, we should figure out a place to, maybe this is a post, but this I think is like, for the typical consumer, this is like the most easily actionable
Right.
Yes.
thing, because ultimately you're not going to be able to DIY. You have to have somebody do this for you, but you have to hold them accountable. And the way to do that is with a set of questions like this. So thank you in advance for that. There were a couple of areas that you brought up as you're preparing for this call that we want to make sure we don't miss out. One was disability, and the other one is Medicare. So I'll let you guys choose which one you want to talk about first. But let's talk about the needs and limitations around each of those.
Sure, I'll take disability because again, I have a personal story to share with disability. And again, going back to COVID with the long haulers, we don't know what that's going to look like from a disability standpoint. We've all heard about people that have recovered from COVID, but still have symptoms well after they have recovered. And when you think about disability insurance as a way to replace income when you're no longer working, that's a big deal. Again, I've said taking a stressful situation and at least easing some of the burden financially by having those policies. Here's my personal story. I was married, first marriage, 2015, and probably about after 8 months of marriage, my husband, we were on our boat and he had a major cardiac event and was rendered permanently disabled after that. At the time, he had a successful wholesaling career in the financial services industry for about 25 years, but was no longer able to continue that career. Thank goodness he had purchased a disability policy through his employer as well as his own personal disability insurance. And again, it took an extremely stressful situation. And from a financial aspect, at least having that policy has eased that financial burden because he is no longer able to work. So I would just say, and this is going back to what Suzanne referenced as far as HR, go to your HR benefits area, find out if you have a disability policy offered through your work, and understand how those benefits work. And when you have those questions that you're asking that financial professional and you're sitting down going through your financial plan, disability insurance needs to be part of that conversation to determine if that's something that is right for you.
And I would reference in the paper as well, we put some startling statistics to this as well. And, you know, when you look at it, a new worker, 1 in 4 are estimated to become disabled during their work life, and 1 in 7 ages 35 to 65. So to Sheila's point, and I've known her husband a long time, you know, that would not have seemed like a likely outcome. And he is that 1 in 7.
No.
And, sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead. No, I listen, I couldn't agree with you more, right? People don't understand. They think about like, well, what happens if I get hit by a car? Well, you're much more likely to hit by a car and live, right? And suffer through that episode. And I think, yeah, Sheila, and Suzanne, your recommendation absolutely square on. It's not expensive in the workplace. The one word of caution is, and Mark can talk about this, is, you know, you look at the instability we're facing right now here in the work, in the whole entire employment sector right now. And if you lose your job, what happens to your disability policy? There, you do need to have think about it in layers with employer, but what happens if I'm not with an employer? Do I have my own protection that I own or can't afford that would fill those gaps? So Mark, maybe you've got some thoughts there.
I think the key is really kind of, you know, preparing for the unexpected. I mean, if you were to ask me a year ago, you know, and being in the industry and kind of even knowing all the statistics that are out there in terms of the probabilities, if you were asking me a year ago if I thought my father would be in a facility right now, I would have said no. I mean, I never would have seen that coming at this point in his life. So I think, you know, even if you are aware of the probability and the statistics that are out there, I think being prepared, you know, can never come soon enough. And I think that starting that conversation is the most important part of it, because I think nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. You can look at all the statistics out there and nobody's going to think, okay, this could happen tomorrow, this could happen next month. So I think the sooner that you have those conversations, the sooner you put something in place, the better. And I think the key is really opening up that dialogue. And I think the questions that you laid out are great ways to kind of interview and find out if that advisor, you know, has the skill set to really address those issues.
Absolutely.
And I would also encourage advisors to make sure they know about the different tax implications. If you pay for your premiums pre-tax or post-tax, that can make a big difference on the benefits that you receive.
Enormous.
I was about to add, we actually within Milliman were offered a disability policy to augment our existing corporate one this year as a benefits package addition. So we could opt into that and pay, as Janet said, with our own post-tax dollars. So.
Yeah, and is it worthwhile, if you're in that generation, to actually spend the time to understand Medicare, how Medicare works? Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Medicare Supplement, Part A, or Plan A, Plan B, Plan F. It's a complicated mess. How do you motivate people who've got a day job, have the kids, to actually learn, what these plans mean and when you should pay for it, when you should be shopping around for new plans?
Well, one motivator is that it's very expensive to have health care in retirement. And so to show the startling figures that we show in our paper about, the cost for retirement health care is going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And to be able to be savvy about what Medicare part and plan you pick is of the utmost importance. And I think when you talk about present value dollars that are northwards of over $500,000, that's going to grab people's attention. And, there can be a big difference whether you pick a Medicare Advantage plan or a Medicare Sup plan, and then within a Medicare Sup or Medigap plan, which is another synonym for it, which makes it even more confusing. There's different plans you can pick. It's another alphabet soup. So I think that the present values can really grab the person's attention and encourage them to learn more about Medicare. I imagine many people are in my shoes where they're trying to help their parents with their current Medicare plans. And so that's probably at least been in their hubris for a while.
Oh, it is. And I'll tell you, I made the mistake. I'll say, I think my mom did not have a good advisor who, Mark, you'll love this. I think she had a Medicare Advantage plan and Medigap or Medicare Sup. And so I wondered, why is this insurance company refunding me money after I paid premiums? So it's a mess. And when do you find time? If I've got my kids to deal with, I'm worried about jobs and work. If you were, it's not only find an advisor, but it's find an advisor who can kind of do this in chunks and whom you trust. So, Ramsey, what advice would you have for people in our situation?
Well, I'm not that much. I think I'm the same age as all of you, first of all. I think that it comes down to two things. One is you have to find an advisor. Two, you have to know what questions to ask the advisor, because otherwise the advisor is just going to come at you with what they know, which is not, which is what they do. I mean, there's actually nothing wrong with that. It's just that, unfortunately, a lot of the burden is on us as the consumers to define what it is we want. And then the next piece is, I just think technology is an answer, because while all this is very confusing to our human minds, really, it just all boils down to a bunch of if-then statements. Like the if-then statements, in the context of a computer program would, if it doesn't eliminate all the decisions, but will eliminate, a lot of them, or at least collate them according to what our specific needs and preferences are. So, to me, I view a tech-enabled world. I hope for more advisors that focus on these issues rather than investment issues. And so, those are the things that we need. And unfortunately, I think both of those things are rare, in the sense that some of the technology exists, people are still learning to adopt them. And then I just think that most advisors are wired for accumulation and investment. And I think we need to get past that.
Yeah, well put. We're right at the edge of our time. I don't know, Suzanne, Sheila, Janet, any sort of final thoughts? I mean, we will put a link to your report in our show notes so people can find it. I think we could have a couple episodes on this, digging into your papers and the questions you left unanswered, but I think also questions that will emerge over the next couple of months. I don't know, Suzanne, what's your
Yeah, I think I'd sum it up by saying, and Janet used this in a paper she wrote maybe a year or so ago, which is Virgil's old quote, right? Your health is your wealth. And bringing it back again to the filter, the lens of the women's market. This is, and Janet mentioned some numbers here. We also addressed some in the paper, which is, you retire early, which we've seen, let's say 1 million people retire in excess of prior years. There are a lot of costs associated with that. And recognizing the fact that you really have that responsibility to tap into some of the resources that are available to you, because it really is going to be, and, if then, I think Ramsey, you said, consequence of,
Yes.
a little planning. And I know we don't have time to go into my story, but I would bookend it by saying that my family actually, because of a sudden death of a business partner in the early 90s, actually got busy with this early. And it has been a very different experience for our family. So I would add that as maybe a good news story, which is we are open. We have conversations. Our attorney is involved. We have all of our proxies in place, and it's just it can be morbid sometimes, but we have very open conversations.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it with that. I'll pass it to Sheila.
I would just say one thing. This book, Medicare and You, comes out every single year. The financial advisory professional community, I think every advisor should have this book. You can go to medicare.gov and download it. If you're on Medicare, you get a hard copy. If not, download the book. It's great to give an overview from a consumer standpoint, client standpoint. Interview your financial professional and see if they can help address these healthcare concerns and questions and solutions. Because going back to one thing real quickly that Ramsey said, do it yourself. This is something you do not want to do yourself. You need to have financial professional advice.
Yeah.
And I would just lead on with what Suzanne said, that it is really important to spend upfront time, even though we don't really have much time when we're taking care of everyone and our dog. It really can save time down the road. My husband and I spend all our vacations doing family matters, and it's really helped us now that my mother's in a long-term care facility.
Well, that's great. We've got some really kind of good end stories where you've done the research and you've actually lived the experience and addressed the problems yourself. So listen, thanks so much. We'd love to have you back. We'll make sure that we push the link out to your show. And Mark Ramsey, thanks for joining us. And please tune in again next week for another episode of That Annuity Show.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.